Yep. All right. It's all you, Steven. 10 minutes. No going over.
All right, let's see if I can put this into 10 minutes. Um, we've heard the answer JSON data from other presentation, and that's really what we're looking to solve here. We decided to take on a different approach for this by reintroducing promo standards, but without the SOAP protocol. So, surprisingly, the S in SOAP stands for simple, and at the time the standard was introduced, it did make life simpler. But since then, new protocols have emerged with more elegant and cleaner options for communication. So, why did we choose REST? Really, maybe the better question is why not REST? The reasons are both practical and preferential, especially by the implementators. Those who actually bring the standards to production. Practically speaking, REST is more lightweight than SOAP. Not only is it because it has a smaller character footprint, but also because an HTTP request containing JSON doesn't need to bear the additional overhead of a SOAP envelope. Smaller requests and response payloads results in a more concise communication that leads to reduced network traffic and lower CPU usage. REST is also, as we saw, so much easier to adapt for client-side applications such as web and mobile apps. The developer community is adopting the REST standard at a much higher rate than SOAP. Promo standards launched with SOAP despite a growing number of REST implementations. And this rigid structure has allowed more control over the service definition, but on the flip side, has made some partners reluctant to adopting the standard. As participation grows, we think an open source community guided kind of solution will allow better participation and innovation going forwards. So our project, it's primarily composed of a .NET Core project. We elected that as a reliable web-based framework for its ease of implementation and its integration with other tools. So most of the code that holds the standard specification, this resides in generated C# classes that we generated from WSDLs provided by Starline. And then we just had to do a bit of tweaking to the schema code to add more qualitative data in the spec. And then we use a Swagger library to generate the API documentation. It refers to the encode the API controllers available and then follows the definitions of those inputs and the outputs, and then provides a UI to read, explore, and test the specification. We did have some restructuring to do as offering the data using JSON should adhere to REST principles. This is such as resource grouping, the appropriate usage of HTTP verbs, and other URL conventions. The changes we have done was not to restructure the existing object specification, but how should these be offered via the available calls. So more on this in a moment. As for security, we would rather not engage in the debate of the appropriate choice of. So that's a little out of scope. So therefore, we just simply decided to implement using basic HTTP authentication. This means supplying the user ID and password. It's going to be contained in the request header rather than the body, the request payload. And we've also included a variety of related tools to assist with the review and the implementation of this REST promo standards. So this includes a validator tool, much like the existing one, to aid in identifying compliance issues and confirming that an implementation is valid. Our validation tool is powered by JSON.NET, a Newtonsoft product. It has the capabilities of providing validation results against a given JSON schema. We've also added an alternative UI because we found the Swagger API documentation to be heavily technical and may be a little too daunting for non-technical representatives. So we made an easy layout that's just easy to read, and it comes with pre-written API call examples and demo data. And a little bonus, we've also added a simple product viewer, just as a quick example of how easy it is to get started and integrated. So as mentioned, the usage of Swagger takes care of that management task to have the standard presented. What is appreciated from this tool is the fact that it's the code itself that is the definition of the standard. When the specification changes, so does the documentation. This eases the maintenance of making the entire the management easier. So there's two sets of documentations here. One's for the schema definition. This is what fields are in a given object, what the object composed of, its expected data types, requiredness. But the other set of documentation is the endpoints, how to access this data. Uh, this is Swagger's like primary usage to look at an API implementation and offer the documentation details on API things like where is the endpoint? Which HTTP verbs do you have to use? Get versus post. The query parameters that are offered, for filtering purposes, and also what kind of responses are expected. This is talking about your HTTP codes, such as 200 for success, 204 for no content, etc. You can even use this Swagger UI test to test the endpoints. You can submit sample requests, the API is called, and you can review the responses. Moving to a REST service architecture is more than just changing things from XML to JSON. There are principles behind REST and a REST implementation that the general public adheres to, and we should respect also. The main takeaway, the main point is that from these REST principles is that an endpoint should be grouped by resources. Right now we have it by services, right? So the idea behind a given URL is that you should be able to read it and it should describe the kind of data that it returns. So looking at the first example here, we got /API/products. This is going to return a collection of products, while API products SL238PR is going to return an instance of a product. With SL238PR, that's your product ID. It's in the route of the URL. Next example there, the /inventory. This is going to be a call that returns a collection of inventory resource, which is a sub resource of products. You could think of it like a parent-child relationship. An example of a restructure that we had to do was consolidating existing endpoints, such as the get product closeout or get product sellable, as both of these are returning the same kind of data. The real difference is in the requests, the ask, the filter, the response. So in a REST structure, these endpoints would exist in the same URL that requests for all products. It's the same resource, except that you supply your filtering options as query parameters. And that's denoted by the question mark in the URL. Thus, with one API implementation of get products, along with the proper implementation of the query params, you go from hosting 4 different existing endpoints in our product 2.0 into a singular endpoint that, let's call it product 3.0. So another example of restructuring was get filtered values. That's currently a call that returns 3 different kinds of resources. You got your product colors, sizes, and parts. So this would have to now get restructured into the 3 different endpoints, each one serving that given resource. A tool that we had to include in our solution scope is, of course, Validator, because our prototype is similar to the existing one, the one that's hosted on the PromoStandards site. And all you got to do is plug in your endpoint URL, it fetches the results, and then passes that through a validator service, which then compares the given schema against the official one, listing out any differences or the details at the field or value level that is considered not compliant. So this is very crucial for the adoption of the standards, of course. We know that we have to, this is to ensure conformity among all of our implementers. We've added this in as part, like it's just an alternative UI to the one that's generated. And this one is made to just be simpler and more to the punch of your specification inquiries. In its current form, we have built a list of sample calls, and then when you select them, it shows you the API call behind it, and you can even tweak that and call it yourself. And it just pulls the schema and the data and puts it into user-friendly grids that's packed with your familiar features, such as searching, sorting, filtering, column selection. As we have a limited control over like how Swagger presents the information, this easy to use tool makes it a better go-to for getting your quick information about the standards. And as a bonus, we just spun up a sample usage here. It's just a simple tool that will pull data from the product inventory and media APIs. And it just goes to show that once you have your REST APIs up and going, how easy it is to just integrate without all of that SOAP overhead. Rapid proof of concept prototyping. So what you see here in front of you is powered by 100 lines of JavaScript codes. Before I go over and play with the tools that we built, I just wanted to take a moment to talk about the future. Um, it's the reason why we're all here. It's for continuous improvement. We believe that PromoStandards should take on an open source approach. And after all, this is a technical venture. And what better way to manage it than with a code set that is universally viewed and accepted as a single point of truth? As an ERP developer, the part that excites me most about our solution, besides the fact that we have majestic JSON outputs, is the open source implementation. Now, anyone can easily clone the GitHub project and use that as a starting point to your own implementation. Let's discourage putting technical efforts in rewriting the wheel and encourage the discussion of change for the better. What would you contribute?
30 seconds.
All right, so we have it live, and this is the Swagger generated API documentation. Let me just refresh it. We didn't have time to scope the entire thing, so we just grabbed a few of them and ported them over. And we, for the sake of familiarity to our services, we still grouped them up to what you could expect under our current ones. So each one here is an API that is set up and ready to go. And using the reading the code, it pulls up all the parameters as inputs and what you can expect as a response and gives you the ability to try it out.
So did you recreate most every PromoStandards service as a REST service? So what I'm seeing?
Not all of them, but
But
we started off with product data, and then yeah, we just took a look at the inventory, the get filter values, broke it up. What's interesting to note here is that even if we grab these from different services, everything is a sub resource of products.
all right, so I'm gonna allow one question here. Erica has posted in the chat the live demo of this for anybody who's curious. Any of our judges have a question? If not, we'll hop to Steve's, which isn't a quick answer. All right, so you're gonna get Steve's question. Does a solution enforce a strict data contract? Can you insert additional new fields not in the schema into the request or response without causing issue?
You definitely can. Where you might be crossing some red tape would be in the validator, because this works against the official spec. If in your implementation you are adding fields, this will mention of things that are not compliant, but it definitely allows anybody to extend the behavior and, let's say, add paging as as parameters, even if the spec never asked for it.
Excellent. All right, great job, team. That's putting SOAP to rest. Yeah, I think there's a lot of pressure being put on everybody to put SOAP to rest here. So I threw a poll in the old Slack channel for everybody to chime in there if you're curious. But good job. So yeah, Erica's got all the demos. So yeah, everybody follow along in the chat for demos. That seems to be the going place for live demos. So play around with them. Some very strong opinions on SOAP. So great job. All right, Amy, who's next?